It began raining a little from a hazy, cloudless seeming sky as Paul, 26, and Michelle, 21, walked towards Chelsea to attend a magazine release party in an art gallery. Paul resigned to not speaking and was beginning to feel more like he was moving through the universe than walking on a sidewalk. He stared ahead with a mask-like expression, weakly trying to remember where he was 1 year ago. Last November, more for something to do than because he wanted to know, though he was not incurious. Michelle to his left drifted in and out of his peripheral vision, far enough away for pedestrians to pass unknowingly between them, like a slow amorphous flickering. Paul was thinking the words somewhere, meditatively, as both placeholders and ends, when Michelle asked if he was okay. Yes, said Paul automatically. As they entered a building a few minutes later, he sort of glanced at Michelle and was surprised to see her grinning, then couldn't stop himself from grinning. Sometimes during an argument, feeling like he'd been acting in a movie and the scene had ended, Paul would suddenly grin and cause Michelle to grin, and they'd be able to enjoy doing things together again for 1 to 40 hours. But that hadn't happened this time, partly because Michelle had grinned first. Paul looked away, slightly confused, and suppressed his grin. What, he said in an unintentionally loud monotone, unsure what he felt exactly, and they entered a large mundane elevator whose doors closed slowly. What? Said Paul at normal volume. Nothing, said Michelle, still grinning a little. Why are you grinning? No reason, said Michelle. What caused you to grin? Nothing, just life, the situation. Entering the party, on the 5th floor, Paul realised he'd said vaguely negative things on the internet at some point about a person who was probably in attendance, so walked quickly to Jeremy, an easy-to-talk-to acquaintance, and asked what movies he'd seen recently. Michelle stood at a near distance, partly in view, then obscured, then fully in view, before approaching with what seemed like a sly smile to ask if Paul wanted a drink. Jeremy was calculating aloud the per-hour price of a 2-part biopic of Che Guevara when Michelle returned with a beer. Paul thanked her and she moved away in an intermittent, curving, crab-like manner, seeming relaxed and disorientated. She wants to be alone, thought Paul with some confusion, or she wants to let me be alone. An hour later they were holding their 3rd or 4th drink, sitting on chairs in a dark corner facing what seemed to Paul like one group of 60 to 80 friends. Loud, dancey, mostly electronic music, currently Michael Jackson, played from unseen speakers. Paul was staring in an area of torsos. In his previous relationships he knew he had experienced dissatisfaction, to some degree, as an empirically backed enthusiasm for the future, because it implied the possibility of a more satisfying relationship with someone he hadn't met. With Michelle, whom he felt closer to than his previous girlfriends, he told her this a few times, truthfully. Dissatisfaction felt more like a personal failing, a direct indication of internal malfunctioning, which he should focus on privately correcting. Instead, he vaguely knew he was waiting for Michelle, or some combination of Michelle and the world, to endure and overpower his negativity, to be the solution in which he would irreversibly, untraceably dissolve. He sipped his wine, thinking about how Michael Jackson had been using 10 to 40 Xanax per night, according to the internet, before he died last summer. Paul distractedly scooted his chair towards Michelle and with unclear purpose touched her shoulder, tentative and reckless as a child petting a large dog looking elsewhere. Expecting the bored expression of 10 minutes ago, when they looked at each other non-committedly as she returned to her chair with another drink, Paul was surprised by Michelle's severely, actively, almost seethingly depressed expression. Michelle's face reddened antagonistically in reflexive defence, it seemed, because then she appeared frustrated and a little confused, then shy and embarrassed. Paul asked if she wanted to leave soon. Michelle hesitated, then asked if that was what Paul wanted. I don't know. Are you hungry? Not really, are you? I don't know, said Paul. I would eat somewhere. One night, months ago, they had sat on a curb on Lafayette Street to continue an argument in a resting position. Paul had become distracted by Michelle's calm, intelligent demeanour, and had begun to forget why they were arguing, even while speaking in an agitated voice. As he became fixated with increasing appreciation on how Michelle liked him enough to not simply leave and never see him again, which he could do, which anyone could always do, Paul had thought suddenly intrigued by the concept of gratitude. Do you want to eat at the green table? If that's what you want, said Michelle. Okay, when do you want to leave? After I finish this glass of wine? Okay, said Paul, and scooted his chair halfway to where it had been. I'm going to introduce Kyle to someone. I'll be back in like 5 minutes. Paul couldn't find Kyle, 19, or Kyle's girlfriend, Gabby, 28. His suitmate in an apartment off the Grey Mile train stop in Brooklyn, and was returning to Michelle when he realised he'd walked past Kyle, standing drunkenly alone in a dense area of people as if at a concert. After some indecision, briefly motionless, Paul turned around and asked if Kyle wanted to meet Tracy. Kyle nodded and followed Paul outside the gallery to a wild hallway, where 6 people, including Tracy, described earlier by Kyle as really hot, by Paul as her blog gets a lot of hits, shook hands with one another. Paul grinned uncomfortably as he stared at one person, then another, thinking he had absolutely nothing to say, except maybe what he was currently thinking, which didn't seem appropriate and also kept changing. He noticed Michelle sitting alone against a wall around 30 feet away. The front of his head felt extraneous and suctioned as a plastic bag, stuck there in a wind, as he walked to her, aware she had probably seen him grinning at Tracy, and asked if she wanted to go now. "Do you?" said Michelle, not standing. "Yeah," said Paul, looking toward the gallery. You can talk to Kyle more if you want." "I don't want to," said Paul. "It seems like you do." "I don't," said Paul, who viewed friends mostly as a means to girlfriends. He knew, contrary to Michelle, who valued them as ends. They've discussed this a few times and concluded to some degree that Paul had his right in, Michelle her friends. "I'm just going to say bye to him. I'll be right back." When he couldn't find Kyle in the hallway, he walked robotically into the dark, crowded gallery, thinking, lost in the world, in a precariously near earnest tone. Kyle was standing with a group of people in a sideways manner that didn't clearly indicate if he knew them or not. He looked at Paul with an expression like he was thinking what to say, then like he was going to insult Paul, then less like he'd chosen to refrain than like he'd lost interest. "I think Michelle feels like I'm not giving her enough attention," said Paul slowly. "That's funny," said Kyle after a few seconds, "because Gabby, after one of our parties, said you gave Michelle so much attention and were always next to her talking to her, but I'm always talking to somebody else and that I don't love her." "What did you say?" "That I love her and gave her attention," said Kyle with a bored, self-loathing expression. Paul couldn't find Michelle in the hallway, then turned the corner and saw her crouched on the floor 60 to 80 feet away, discrepant and vulnerable, in the bright off-white corridor as a rarely seen animal. Paul, walking self-consciously towards her, vaguely remembered a night early in their relationship when he somehow hadn't expected her to enlarge in his vision as he approached where she'd stood, looking down at Flyer, one leg slightly bent, in Think Coffee. The comical, bewildering fear, equally common and surprising, amusing and foreboding, he'd felt as she rapidly and sort of ominously increased in size, had characterized their first 2 months together. It seemed that they would never fight, and the nothingness of the future had gained a frameworky somethingness that felt privately exciting, like entering a different family's house as a small child, or the beginning elaborations of a science fiction conceit. Then, one night in late April, after cooking and eating pasta together, Paul had complained, meekly, without looking at her face, that Michelle never helped wash dishes. Michelle stared at him silently a few seconds before her eyes became suddenly watery, the extra layer of translucence materializing like a shedding of something delicate. Paul stared back, weirdly entranced. He'd never seen her cry, before crawling across his wood floor, over his yoga mat, dizzy with emotion, to hug her and apologize. In May, began complaining once or twice a week that certain things Michelle did were inconsiderate, that he felt neglected. Then by July, most days was either visibly irritated or mutely inscrutably despondent, as if he alone had a vast knowledge of horrible truths, which he knew he didn't, but could still feel good, to some degree, after coffee or alcohol, or when easily attainable prescription drugs, mostly methadone, supplied by Michelle's friends who had fallen downstairs, which they'd ingested once every 4 to 6 days for 5 weeks, ending 3 weeks ago. One night since then, Michelle had told Paul it seemed like he hated her, and Paul, after around 10 seconds, had cited the day they'd had fun together, then had grinned and said, no, illogically when Michelle correctly said they'd been on methadone that day. "Why are you sitting so far away?" "I'm waiting for you. You said you wanted to leave an hour ago." Outside, on the sidewalk, Michelle walked quickly ahead with her hands in her jacket pockets, as if to better escape Paul with a more streamlined form, though also it was still raining. Paul asked what she wanted to do. "I don't know," she said. "I'm not hungry anymore." They crossed 10th Avenue in a diagonal, not at an intersection. Through headlights of a stopped taxi, 2 or 3 people were closing their umbrellas, getting in onto the opposite sidewalk, and continued downtown, bodies bent against the wind. "Wait," said Paul. "Can we stop walking for a minute?" They stopped, facing the same direction on the sidewalk. "What's wrong?" said Paul after a few seconds, slightly accusatorily. "You've been ignoring me all night," said Michelle. "I moved close to you and hugged you when you were sitting. Once we got inside, you walked away and started talking to other people." "You walked away from me," said Paul. I felt confused.